Stephen, thanks for doing spoiler talk about The Only Good Indians. And I think Night of the Mannequins is going to come up in this too. But thank you so much for doing this.
This is cool. I don't get to talk about spoilers very often. It'll be fun.
All right. So I'm just coming out swinging on this one. So, from a perspective of the reader, I don't think that we saw Denora, and I hope I'm saying the name right,
Yeah, yeah.
as a final girl until like not long before it happened. So was that kind of like your idea, or did that kind of naturally grow as you were writing the story?
It kind of naturally grew, but also like when you identify the final girl too early in a slasher, then you start realizing that everybody around her is just a carving dummy, and she's going to walk a charmed path through all the blades and danger and everything. So, yeah, I did. I mean, I did want her to just come on in the third movement of the story as the final girl, you know?
So one of the things that came up in our review, and I can't remember if it was our normal review or the spoiler stuff we talked about on our Patreon about the book, was so basketball came up, and the thing that I thought was cool was that all of the attributes of a person who is a star basketball player naturally translate to surviving deadly situations. And so it wasn't, you didn't telegram that this is what's going on, but once I knew where the story was leading, I thought, man, that was great. That was a great way to show why she's worthy of surviving.
Oh, cool. Thank you. You know, I didn't really know it was going to end in a basketball duel. I knew that Lewis and Shaney and then Lewis and Peeta had played ball in part one, but I was probably pretty deep into part two before I realized there was going to be a part three, and it was going to involve basketball. But the reason it had to involve basketball was because earlier Gabe had said something about Denora playing basketball, and then she got her own chapter where she's shooting free throws and everything. And I realized that Elkhead Woman comes for you. It doesn't just come for you. Like, she doesn't want to just walk in and tear your throat out. There's not any pleasure in that for her. She wants to enact revenge on you. She wants to take from you that which is most precious, the same as they took her calf from her. And so she identifies with each person what is most precious to them, and then has them destroy it, basically. And so that's why she had to come at Denora on the basketball court, because basketball is the most precious thing to Denora. But then Denora, the reason Denora is able to, get the upper hand in that game is because Elkhead Woman is not supposed, like, she kind of has rights to Gabe and Cass and Ricky and Lewis because they are the perpetrators of the crime against her. But when she goes beyond those boundaries and starts trying to take revenge on the children of those four hunters, she's stepping outside what she has privilege to, I think, as far as justice cycles go, which is why Denora is able to stand up against her.
That's cool. You actually just answered what the follow-up question was. So that's kind of funny. But one thing that, again, as the book goes on, we kind of have to reframe what we think is happening as a reader. And so it's not obvious earlier in the book that the Elkhead Woman is actively manipulating the characters to do things. So it's pretty obvious with Gabe and Cass. But with Lewis, it's a little bit more ambiguous, like how she's manipulating the situation. So was she manipulating Lewis in the same way?
Yeah, she was. I think the reason I slowed it down for Lewis was so that we could understand how devious she is, I guess, and patient, and how what she wants to do is plant seeds of uncertainty and then let that bloom inside her prey's head or heart or whatever. And so that's what she does with like when Gabe kills Cass, it's because he thinks Cass shot his daughter, who was actually Nate, you know? And yeah, so she does to them the same thing that she was doing to Lewis. It's just, for me to protract it for them, as long as it's protracted for Lewis, I think would be just like beating a dead horse, because hopefully the reader's already seen it by that point, you know?
Yeah. Well, the other thing that Livius brought up that I thought was an interesting insight was that she didn't have a body for the Lewis part, so that might have something to do with what she's capable of doing as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, she has to get born.
So that whole, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages where Lewis is, he's suspecting both Peeta and Shaney for a little bit, but when when part 1 climaxes, by the way, was fucking brilliant and probably my favorite few pages ever in a horror novel. So much that I was probably, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but I was almost disappointed that wasn't the book climax. Like that was so worthy of a great ending, and it ends a story for sure, and then kind of starts another one. But when I was reading Night of the Mannequins, I kind of realized that Sawyer is somewhat in the same position, right? Where he has suspicions not about specific people, but that he goes and essentially, because this is spoilers, I guess I could just say it, Lewis kills Peeta and kills Shaney because of crazy shit that's going on in his head, and Sawyer is very similar in Night of the Mannequins, which I absolutely loved. So what is it about that theme that makes it so appealing? I'm assuming it's appealing to you because you wrote 2 stories that have a similar kind of, approach to it.
Yeah. I think, the next 3 novels I wrote after Mannequins and Good Indians doesn't have any of that going on. I think the reason both of those do is simply because I took a break in Good Indians to write Mannequins, and so I think my brain was still in that same mode. But to me, if I have to break down what a horror story is to its essential components, then it is a character chipping off a piece of their soul in order to keep living, And so for me, Lewis, in doing what he does to Peeta, which he doesn't actually kill her, he kills her like indirectly, but when he harvests that little elk calf up from her, that to me is his soul. He's like trading in his soul in order to insist on this little bubble of irreality that he's living in, and this magical thinking that he's taking part in. And then he tries to take that show on the road up to the reservation. Doesn't quite make it.
One thing that I thought was, like we said before, like there's the multiple parts, there's 3 parts. And in the 3rd part, in the Gabe Cast Denora part, now that the Elkhead woman has like a physical body, as flawed as it may be, the narrator starts kind of talking to her, and that threw me off at first because I didn't really think about it, but because it was like a 3rd person narration or whatever. But then at the end of the sentence might be, and then she sees you, or something like that, and it's obvious that the narrator was talking to so I don't even know how to properly explain what that is, but that was a really cool way of bringing that character kind of more front and center.
Well, thank you. I think people call it second person, but it's really that weird delivery that you're talking about is direct address, or dramatic monologue. Yeah. Dramatic monologue is what it gets called in the classroom, I guess. And dramatic monologue uses the you, but it is an actual person talking to the character, basically, or the intended recipient of this letter, or whatever it is, But as for why I did that in Only Good Indians, it's because when you go to see a slasher movie like Jason, Freddy, Michael, Ghostface, whatever, there's always going to be those looking through the eye holes of the monster's mask, or the slasher's mask. That's how we start out, Halloween in 1978, looking through Michael's mask, and we hear their breathing, and I always call that slasher cam. That's how we know that there's some threat, and the threat is just in the bushes, and there's the target. And I think it's wonderfully economical, and it works really well on screen. But how to do that on page? It's real. If you break a section, if you do a section break and drop down to, the person is looking through the bushes, it breaks everything. And so I had to find a mechanism which could achieve something like slasher cam, but without breaking things, I guess. And so what I came up with was sliding in that dramatic monologue feel every great once in a while.
Yeah, it was, as a person obviously that's not as knowledgeable about things things like that, and seeing it on the page, it was great. It was so effective because it was almost like it threw me off a little bit when it happened, because it was like, oh shit, she's right here. Like you felt like she was in your space almost.
Yeah, that's good. That's wonderful. That makes me so happy that worked.
One final thought I have too was that in the very last part where it's the chase, it's really stripped down, and it's just like pursuit and survival. But there was one moment where you brought back the train from the hunt early in the book that I did not see coming, and it was just such a great way of kind of reinforcing like where this all came from, but also like the limitations of, I guess, the rules of Elkhead Woman in a way. So that was I like that effect.
Yeah, well, she's kind of still victim of the terrors of elk, and she can't willingly, or it's really hard for her to be around trains, because I mean, elk they're pretty bad, but they're nothing against a train,
Yeah.
So this question is, I probably shouldn't even ask this question. So the whole thing about the elk understanding and like having the memories of the rest of the herd, is that something you believe?
Do elk have lore? I think elk do have lore. Yeah, I don't think they transmit it as we transmit things. I think they do it in gestural ways, and they use scent in different ways. But I do think that elk tell stories. I think animals tell stories about. I mean, we know crows tell stories to each other. They don't go over here because bad things happen over here, that kind of stuff. And that's basically what the elk are doing here. They're saying, stay away from this place where all these elk got shot.
I found it fascinating, and I guess I never really gave it much thought. So I was kind of trying to get your take, on if that was a, more a plot device or something you genuinely believe.
Yeah, I strongly suspect it anyways. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to talk about that's spoilery that maybe you haven't got a chance to discuss?
I don't know if y'all read the finished copies or the advanced reading copies, but I didn't notice until the very end that the advanced reading copies were circulating with a prologue called Prologue. The typesetter or book designer or whatever, just they like headings on stuff, I guess. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh no! So I called my editor, like, we got to change this. And the reason I wanted to change it, it's now Williston, North Dakota, which is where that prologue takes place, and it is a prologue. I'm not ashamed of doing prologues. I think prologues can be wonderful. However, there's so many readers out there who they don't distinguish between a prologue and an introduction and a preface, and so they think all that front matter you can skip. And so I think when you put prologue as a chapter header, you're inviting people to skip over something that might be very vital. So I was lucky that the publisher let me go in and change that at the very end.
Yeah, we did read. I believe Rob did. I know I read the advanced reader copy, which thank you, by the way. You sent those to us, so thank you very much. That's weird because I've skipped an introduction or two, but usually if it's okay, so it depends on what it is, right? So if I'm reading a classic and another writer or professor is introducing it, I'm like, all right, there's important stuff here. I've read books that were small publishers where just a friend of theirs wrote an introduction. And I go, all right, I could probably skip this one, but a prologue, I couldn't imagine that there's people that do that.
I know. I think it's just that they don't distinguish. They just say it's front. I don't read that.
They think chapter 1 is the beginning, basically.
Yeah. Exactly.
In a way, I guess I could see why people would have that misunderstanding.
But that keep me up at night if I imagine people out there not reading that part with Ricky. Yeah. And also, maybe I should say that Ricky part too, where Ricky is killed outside the bar. That initially came about probably a third of the way through the Sweat Lodge Massacre. And then when I was revising it at the editor's request, changing a lot of stuff, I realized that I could put that chapter, I could slide it ahead a chapter or behind a chapter and nothing would change. And I thought, well, that sucks because everything needs to be locked in place really firmly. And so then I just kind of tilted the whole manuscript. And that chapter with Ricky slid all the way to the front. And I realized that it was sliding into like a slasher notch. Like, because slashers always start with like 2 random camp counselors getting killed, kind of mysterious. And I hadn't done that. I wasn't doing the blood sacrifice you have to do at the top of a slasher. And so I was really lucky that I had that piece that would just slide right in.
So, because we're back on slashers, it's obviously something that you like to write. Mm-hmm. Something came up, and I'm going to get this way wrong, but I think it was Tremblay talking about you'd done a pass on something on Survivor Song.
Survivor Song, yeah.
You were a beta reader, I think.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how interesting your interpretation of how things were going was because someone had done something and you were expecting a specific kind of reaction to it. So
I was totally like we can spoil right?
Yeah.
Like Romola. I was once she does that thing on the bus where she doesn't tell the other people on the bus that her friend, what's her friend's name? Romola and what is it?
Natalie. Nats.
Yeah. Natalie. Okay. That she is actually infected. I was like, ding, ding, ding! Somebody's got to come cut Romola's head off, you know? Because that's a huge sin to do that in a story, you know. And so that manipulated or that changed my expectations as I was reading. It made it tense in different ways, you know.
That did seem especially heinous in the moment when she wasn't telling people. It was like, oh, this doesn't feel good.
Yeah. But but then of course, Paul, he's never going to give you what you expect. He's always really good at surprising you, you know. And so my expectation became Romola's going to die, and then she doesn't die, you know.
I've learned more about slasher movie structure, I think, in this last hour. So to recap for anybody listening to the interview, I guess I never thought about basically all slasher movies or revenge films.
Oh yeah,
and I mean I've been like in my head I'm trying to think no it can't really be all of them, and I'm struggling to find like one that isn't, and then kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
with this Romola thing. You're right.
Yeah. A lot of people call Texas Chainsaw Massacre a slasher because it's got a signature weapon, a chainsaw. It's got somebody in a mask, Leatherface, and it's got a group of kids dying one by one and everything. So it rings a lot of the slasher bells, but you have to ask what's the trespass that's being righted here? What's the wrong that's being righted in Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And there's not one. I mean, the only thing you can really indict is the depressed economy, which drives this family to cannibalism. And you can't really get revenge against the economy, you know?
No. Well, I mean, you could try, I guess, but yeah, it's
not with a chainsaw, probably.
No. Yeah.
So I have you've probably heard this or thought of this yourself, but now I just want to know, what's the most unseeming slasher story? Like, what's the most slasher fitting story that isn't categorized that way?
I think.
And I don't know is a completely acceptable answer.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I've got a lot of them. A lot of people don't count Halloween as a revenge story, but I count it as a revenge story. I think Michael Myers. I'm not answering your question directly, but Michael Myers is getting revenge on babysitters. It was originally called The Babysitter Murders. You know that movie, and the reason he's getting revenge on them is that in the opening segment of Halloween, his sister is supposed to be babysitting him on Halloween night, but she's having sex with her boyfriend instead and neglecting Michael, And so then he goes up and stabs her with a knife and comes back 15 years later to stab the rest of the babysitters as well. So it is a revenge story. And so is Freddy. Nightmare on Elm Street's a revenge story.
Sure.
But which one is called a slasher but isn't about revenge? Let me think.
Or I guess what I was going for is, what's a revenge story that people don't think is a slasher but kind of like fits the...
do you know that old movie with Samuel Jackson, Lakeview Terrace? That always feels to me. That always feels to me like it's a slasher. It's about a neighborhood in California during some of the fires, and one of the neighbors is kind of coming for his neighbors, I guess, who are the protagonists. And I need to watch it again. I haven't watched that movie for probably 10, 15 years, but that movie always feels to me like a slasher, even though nobody ever would call it a slasher. And also, there's a Jamie Lee Curtis movie called Blue Steel from, like 91, somewhere around there, I think. Somewhere in the 90s. And I've always thought that, I mean, my memories of that movie, it feels like a slasher, you know?
So I knew you'd have a couple ideas off the top of your head.
Yeah, I didn't think we'd go to movies, but I guess I'll ask for one recommendation. If I told you that Rob had never seen a slasher film, which one would you tell him to watch?
Probably Friday the 13th Part 2, I think.
Excellent answer. Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen the original 2, 3 Friday the 13th. And again, that documentary on Shudder reminded me that he doesn't put on the hockey mask till 3. And I would have said 2. I totally would have said it was in 2. I know it is in 1, right? Because 1 ends with him coming out of the water.
Yeah.
But they said it. And I had to check in my head. I was like, wait, no. And I was like, oh wait, yeah that's right. So interesting, because we always picture that's the only way anyone pictures Jason is with that hockey mask, and that didn't come on until till Friday the 13th 3D.
Yep. And the story I've heard, which I'm sure it's apocryphal, is that the way that mask got into the Jason mythos is that they were trying to figure out the blocking and the lighting of like Friday the 13th 2 or 3, and just doing rehearsals, and so they had a stand-in for Jason, and somebody said one of the cameramen, a lot of the cameramen of the crew were big-time hockey fans. They were always playing and going to games and stuff, and they needed to see how the light would fall on somebody's face, and so he pulls a mask out of his bag because it's going to be bright and reflective, and he puts it on whoever's doing whoever the stand-in is, and everybody was like, "Whoa!" That the hockey mask changes everything.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
For sure, it changes everything. Wow.
Oh, yeah. But you hear a lot of stories about the mask and where it actually comes from. So they're all conflicting stories. Everyone wants to claim it for themselves,
Yeah.
Yeah, now.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, we went a little bit further than we thought we would with spoilers, but dude, thanks so much for joining us again, and I hope we don't wait for 4 or 6 or whatever years until we have you back on the podcast.
For sure, man. I'm around. Thanks for talking. It was a blast.